When was the last time you felt that tiny, sharp sting in a conversation? Not a blow to the face, not a screaming match, just a comment. Maybe it was a joke at a dinner table, or the specific way someone talked over you as if your voice was just background noise. And when you felt that spike of irritation, the wait what, you probably did what we've all been trained to do. You swallowed it. You told yourself you were being too sensitive. One such incident which happened to me, which I remember really clearly, was in fourth grade when our school it didn't have a football team for girls because not enough girls signed up for there to be a team. And we were just talking about it. I was talking about it with a couple of my friends. We were 9, 10, and a teacher was sitting like next to us. They went and they came up to us and they were like, "Oh, it's probably because football is not a girl sport." According to them, football was boys' sport because boys were naturally better. They were better at football than girls could ever be. That's what they said. And then that has been a moment which has just stuck with me. Hi guys, this is Emmy. Welcome to the fourth episode of Who Does She Think She Is, a podcast where we understand the patriarchy, learn who benefits from it, and dismantle it all with a side of tea. Today's episode is all about microaggressions, about exploring, about knowing if these microaggressions are actually the silent engine that keep the patriarchy alive. Now, back to what we were talking about. Those tiny comments, like the ones I just mentioned, are called microaggressions. I like to think of them as paper cuts. This is a really like visual comparison for me because think about it in this way. You get a single paper cut. It hurts for a while, but ultimately it's small. It heals. But let's say you have paper cuts all over your body. Eventually, you'll bleed out. That is how microaggressions work as well. One single comment, one single subtle, some side remark, it's not going to do anything. But the repetition builds patterns, and these patterns are what play a crucial role in keeping the patriarchy alive today. Okay, so now let's come to the main point. What are microaggressions? Well, if you look it up, you'll get like a long, winded definition about like subtle sides and whatnot. But basically, a microaggression are small comments, you know, small, subtle comments that enforce something. It's the advice that nobody asks for, it's the backhanded compliment. There are so many examples of this, such as someone saying you're so lucky that your husband helps with the kids, or someone telling you to calm down after making a very, how do you say, sexist joke and saying that's just how things are. I know they're like really gaslighty, and that is because they're usually wrapped in niceness. It's concern over your career, or it's honesty about your personality. Like I said, individually, they're small. Anyone can brush off one comment, but collectively, I like to think of them as maps because they tell us who gets to be loud, who has to be ladylike, and whose comfort matters more than your truth. So of course, microaggressions they didn't just evolve one day. They didn't come out of the blue. Like everything, they have history too. They have roots that go deep down into soil. To say it simply, microaggressions are softened remains of much harsher and much aggressive rules. So, as we all know, like 100 years ago, patriarchy did not need to be subtle at all. It was the law. Women weren't allowed to vote, they weren't allowed to own property, they were basically passengers in their own life. But as people started demanding for equality and equal rights and all of that, we know that the system, it instead of going home, it shifted. And instead of using laws to enforce itself, it started using social expectation and psychology. And this transition from the jure by law to de facto by practice exclusion is actually a very well documented historical phenomenon. Coming back to microaggressions, the term was coined, developed in 1970 by Dr. Chester M. Pierce, a Harvard University psychiatrist. He actually used it to describe the subtle, everyday slurs and dismissals he observed being directed to dark skinned Americans. So microaggressions, they don't just involve gender. Like we said, there's so many factors that come under discrimination, and no two people face discrimination in the same way. Likewise, microaggressions too aren't just tied to gender. However, we will be just focusing on that part in this podcast. Yeah. So in today's world, if someone calls a woman emotional in a business meeting today for some idea she expresses or some concern she expresses, they are using the exact same terminology used by 19th century doctors to justify why women shouldn't be allowed to own property. Because that was what they said back in the old days. That was their justification for not letting women own property. They were deemed too hysterical, and they were deemed that they could not make big decisions. So even though now they do not use those, how to say, comments or those ideas to actually make it illegal for women to own property or vote or do anything, it still is there. It hasn't vanished. The idea is still in everyone's minds. Fact, in the late 1990s, psychologists at Harvard, University of Washington, and University of Virginia developed the implicit association test, the IAT. This actually provided scientific data showing that even people who consciously believe in equality often hold unconscious, implicit biases that influence their behaviors. So that is why all of this feels so normal, because it is so deeply rooted into our subconscious. To better understand the concept and microaggressions as a whole, we need to understand its three pillars. The main three pillars of microaggressions were their framework, which was introduced by psychologist Daryl Wing Su. They are microassaults, microinsults, and microinvalidations. These three pillars they explain how everyday comments and action reinforce larger systems of inequality, including the patriarchy. Like I said, each pillar here plays a different role in keeping this system in place. First off, we have micro assaults, and these are like the most obvious form. They're like very intentional, and like they're like direct acts of sexism. This includes making degrading jokes about women, sexually harassing someone, or openly saying that women are less capable. In patriarchy, these are the ones that these micro assaults are what openly work as enforcements of the system. They send a clear message that men hold more power and that stepping outside traditional gender roles will be punished or mocked. Micro insults, on the other hand, they are way more subtle, but they also happen far more often. A really good example of like micro insults are backhanded compliments. Like someone saying you're really smart for a girl. Because these are comments or behavior that quietly undermine women's abilities even if the speaker thinks they're being nice. Like I said, someone saying you're really smart for a girl, or someone directly assuming that a woman is the assistant instead of a boss. And calling a, how do you say, a confident woman bossy while men are praised and called leaders for the same confidence. I know all of these examples, they sound super corny and super cliche, but they're also true. The fact that we think that they're cliche or corny in itself is a really good example of how deeply rooted all of this is. The third pillar of microaggressions are called micro invalidations. And micro invalidations are really interesting because they just deny that inequality, sexism even exists. So this includes dismissing women's experiences by saying things like you're overreacting, sexism isn't a problem anymore, or even the infamous men have it harder now. In patriarchy, this pillar is crucial because it shut down conversations about inequality. If people deny the problem, nothing changes and the system stays exactly as it is. Those were the three pillars of microaggressions. Throughout this episode, I have multiple times have repeated that the reason why we don't question these microaggressions or don't even realize them in the first place is because they seem so normal. It's because they're so deeply rooted into our subconscious. But now let's delve into the why. Why do these microaggressions feel so normal? Why are they so deeply rooted into our subconscious? This is because of what happens internally after your repeated exposure to these microaggressions. They don't just stay as comments from other people. Slowly, they shape your own thought patterns. When you hear the same dismissive jokes, interruptions, or belittling remarks again and again and again, your brain stops reacting to them as unusual. Instead of thinking, wow, that was disrespectful, you begin thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. In this way, they shake and dismantle your own inner monologue, your own thoughts and opinions. The focus shifts from questioning the behavior to questioning yourself instead. And in this way, you yourself start downplaying your own discomfort. Instead of questioning the system, you start thinking, oh, it's not that serious. They didn't mean it, or that I should just laugh. Over time, this turns into self editing. You start adjusting your reactions before anyone else even responds. You might hold back an opinion so that you're not seen as too sensitive. Laugh at something that makes you uncomfortable as to not seem difficult, or stay silent to avoid tension. It feels like you're keeping the peace, but honestly, what you're really doing is managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own. That is why microaggressions feel normal. Not because they're harmless, but because repetition trains you to internalize them. And when you've been hearing the same thing from the time you were born, imagine how big of an impact it has on your thoughts and opinions. Your instinct becomes minimizing your own feelings instead of trusting them. Thus, the behavior stops being challenged. This normalization happens inside your head first, and once people begin doubting their own perceptions, silence becomes more likely and the system continues to thrive. So, now, how do we fight back against something that is so deeply rooted into our own thoughts and opinions? Well, the answer is simple. You start with small steps. You don't have to fight back. You just have to make sure that these aggressions are not left unchallenged, both externally and internally. This doesn't always mean confrontation. It can be as simple as calmly asking, what did you mean by that? Or setting a boundary when you feel like you're being commented on something you don't like. Or even simple, it can be as simple as recognizing your own thoughts, pausing when something like that comes up and saying that, wait, that's not normal and it shouldn't be. These responses interrupt the silence that allows microaggressions to feel acceptable. And like I said, just as important is resisting the urge to self edit. The instinct to laugh along, stay quiet, or downplay your discomfort to keep the peace. Trusting your reaction instead of dismissing it protects your inner voice from being reshaped by repeated biases. Over time, choosing when to speak up, when to disengage, or when to seek allyship becomes a form of resistance. Fighting microaggressions isn't about escalating conflict, it's about refusing normalization. So, the first thing which we need to do is we need to remind ourselves that wait, this isn't normal. What they're saying is not normal, it's not a joke, it's actually something really serious. And that was a wrap on the fourth episode. It was pretty intense, but it was also really want to record and research. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. And thank you for staying until the end. I hope to see you guys in the next episode. I hope you guys had a great time. Bye bye.